She was let go on a Monday. Rourke Huxley didn't look up from his desk when he said it. He just slid the envelope across the mahogany surface and told her to leave her access card with reception on the way out. To Rourke, Naomi Shepherd had been nothing more than a reliable piece of office furniture, quiet, efficient. Replaceable. 3 days later, standing in the basement security room of Huxley Maritime's Vancouver Tower, he watched a piece of recovered camera footage that made the room feel like it was draining of oxygen. He watched her, grey cardigan, sensible flats, thermos of green tea in one hand, and a manila folder in the other, step calmly into the path of a loaded gun, take the man apart in 11 seconds, drag his 220-pound body into a maintenance closet, and then straighten her sleeve and walk upstairs to deliver the quarterly projections he needed. He had fired her for being 22 minutes late. Rourke Huxley ran Huxley Maritime from the 44th floor of the Seawall Centre, a glass tower at the edge of Vancouver's inner harbour, where the mountains across the water turned violet at dusk, and the city lights fractured on the black surface of the inlet below. The company was, officially, one of the largest logistics and freight forwarding firms on the Pacific coast. Unofficially, certain cargo moved through Huxley Maritime that never appeared on any customs declaration, and certain men who operated in the grey space between law and commerce considered Rourke's goodwill to be worth considerable sums of money. He was 39 years old, precise, and perpetually exhausted. He wore suits he never noticed and drank coffee he never tasted, and kept the city running at his feet the way a man keeps a clock wound. Not because he loved it, but because the alternative was silence, and silence gave him too much room to think. Naomi Shepherd had worked in his analytics division for 2.5 years. If you asked Rourke to describe her, he would have paused longer than the question deserved. She was somewhere in her late 20s, with dark hair she kept pinned back, and a habit of wearing the same rotation of slate grey and navy cardigans that seemed engineered specifically to vanish into the background of any room. She arrived 12 minutes before every shift, left exactly on time, ate lunch at her desk, and never asked for anything. She was one of 4 junior analysts on the 4th floor, and in 2.5 years, Rourke had spoken to her directly perhaps 9 times. He had liked her, in the abstract, impersonal way he liked his office's air filtration system, because it worked, and because he didn't have to think about it. That ended on a Monday in November. The meeting with Lucio Falcone was not a meeting Rourke had wanted. Falcone was 3rd-generation Vancouver crime, a man who had inherited the port operations his grandfather built, and spent the last decade maintaining them with a combination of calculated violence and perfectly preserved deniability. He was thin and slow-spoken, and wore a corduroy jacket that made him look like someone's retired geography teacher. He was one of the most genuinely dangerous men Rourke had ever sat across from. The purpose of Monday's meeting was simple, a territorial agreement over the Deltaport container facility. Falcone wanted to route product through a warehouse network that Huxley Maritime controlled. Rourke had no interest in expanding into narcotics, but he had even less interest in what Falcone did to people who declined his business proposals without sufficient diplomacy. This meeting was about managing the refusal of an offer without creating a body count. The data presentation Rourke needed, projected shipping lane constraints that would give him leverage to argue operational impossibility, was supposed to arrive in the boardroom by 10:15. At 10:30, the folder still hadn't appeared. Falcone watched him. The man had pale grey eyes that moved slowly and missed nothing. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence was its own kind of pressure. Rourke hit the intercom embedded in the table. He asked for Naomi by name. He asked again. Static. He was forced to stall. He poured Falcone mineral water. He made conversation about port regulations. He watched the second hand on the boardroom clock and felt his authority bleeding with every tick. At 10:47, the door opened. Naomi walked in carrying the folder. Her hair was perfectly pinned. Her expression was perfectly neutral. But Rourke's eyes, sharpened by years of reading rooms, caught the details. Her left sleeve was pulled fractionally lower than her right, as though she was covering something. Her breathing was almost imperceptibly elevated, and there was a smell that cut through the boardroom's filtered air. Something metallic and sharp, like pennies and burnt dust, that had no business being in a 44th floor conference room overlooking the harbour. She distributed the folders, 3 copies, and stepped back. "Apologies for the delay, Mr. Huxley," she said. Her voice was entirely flat. Falcone glanced at her over the rim of his water glass. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Naomi didn't look at him. She folded her hands in front of her. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Rourke's no. "Thank you." She nodded once and walked out. The meeting concluded. Falcone signed nothing, They rarely did at a first meeting, but the conversation landed well enough. As Falcone left, he shook Rourke's hand with a thin smile that didn't reach his pale eyes. When the boardroom was empty, Rourke remained at the table for a moment. He didn't tolerate unreliability. In the world he operated in, a delayed document wasn't an inconvenience. It was a signal that something in his operation wasn't functioning the way it should. He couldn't afford loose parts. He called her into his office that afternoon. The November rain against the 44th floor windows was the particular kind Vancouver produced this time of year. Not dramatic, just relentless. The kind that reminded you the city was built at the edge of a rainforest, and the rainforest had simply agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Naomi came in and stood near the door. 22 minutes, Rourke said. Yes, sir. I don't need to explain to you why that's a problem. No, sir. Was it technical server issue? A pause, the length of a considered decision, an unforeseen logistical complication. Rourke looked at her properly for the first time, in the way he should have been looking at people all his life and mostly hadn't bothered to. Her eyes were a quiet shade of grey-green, and what struck him, the thing that prickled at the back of his neck even then, though he set it aside, was that there was no fear in them. Not even the controlled performance of apology. Naomi Shepherd was standing in front of the man who signed her paychecks, having just derailed a sensitive meeting, and she was showing him absolutely nothing. He opened his desk drawer and set an envelope on the surface between them. 2 weeks severance. We appreciate your time here. She looked at the envelope. She looked back at him. Understood, Mr. Huxley. She stepped forward, picked it up, and walked out. No tears, no plea, no argument. The door clicked shut with its usual quiet precision, and Rourke stood in his office with the inexplicable sensation of a man who has just thrown something overboard and isn't certain it wasn't the compass. Out in the open-plan floor, Naomi walked to her desk. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She opened the storage drawer beneath her workstation and withdrew a flat cardboard box, assembling it with quick, efficient folds. She placed inside it a plain black coffee mug, a spare pair of reading glasses, a small notebook of her own that she'd clearly kept for personal use. She had no photographs, no plant, no printed calendar with personal appointments marked in colored ink. Her desk was as impersonal as a cleared examination table. She opened the top drawer and took out her access card. She held it for exactly 1 second, her thumb moving across the laminated edge in a motion that was almost too small to see, and then set it precisely in the center of her keyboard. Len Taggart, Rourke's head of security, was crossing the floor as she stood up with the box. Len was a broad-shouldered man with a face that had taken its share of rearranging over the years, a former Army intelligence officer who had seen enough of the world's worst places to be unimpressed by most of what happened in corporate environments. He stopped when he saw the box. Moving desks, Naomi. Moving on, she said quietly. Len's brow furrowed. He glanced toward the closed door of Rourke's office and back. He let you go? Over the Falcone meeting? My employment was terminated, yes. She picked up the box. Make sure Mr. Huxley takes his calls from the legal team before noon on Thursdays. He has a habit of letting them stack, and the exterior camera on the east loading dock drifts 4 degrees left every night between 2 and 4 a.m. It's been flagged in the maintenance system, but it hasn't been addressed. Someone should physically realign the mount. Len stared at her. How do you know about the camera alignment? Naomi gave him a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed things. Goodbye, Len. She walked to the elevator. The doors closed behind her. By Wednesday, her absence had become its own kind of disturbance in the atmosphere of the 44th floor. The temp agency sent a replacement, a young man named Brett who wore strong cologne and had the misplaced confidence of someone who had not yet learned the difference between enthusiasm and competence. He misrouted an internal file within 40 minutes of sitting down. He forwarded an unencrypted summary to an external address by mistake. He brought Rourke black coffee when the standing order was oat milk, no sugar. Minor failures, all of them. The kind that other offices absorbed without consequence. In Rourke's office, they felt like hairline fractures in a load-bearing wall. On Thursday afternoon, he found himself standing at her old workstation. He didn't know what he was looking for. He pulled open the drawers, empty, each one scrubbed back to their institutional default. He tried the bottom left, locked. He went to his office, found a letter opener, and returned. The lock gave with a clean, quiet snap. Inside, there were no personal effects, just a single hardcover notebook with a plain matte black cover, the kind available at any office supply store. He opened it. The handwriting was small and exceptionally precise. No loops, no flourish, each letter formed with the same calibrated economy. It looked less like a person's handwriting and more like data that had learned to hold a pen. September 4, white suburban, partial plate observed. Cordova Street, across from the Seawall Center loading bay, 3 consecutive mornings. Driver photographed from east stairwell window. Face cross-referenced against BC Correctional Records, 2019 conviction, Falcon Associate. Anonymous tip filed with VPD non-emergency line expired registration. Vehicle absent 4th morning, not returned. Rourke sat down slowly in the chair. He had used the loading bay entrance on all 3 of those mornings. He used it most Tuesdays and Thursdays to bypass the main lobby. He was almost always alone for the first 20 meters of the walk to his private lift. He turned pages. More dates, more plates, more names, written without commentary, without editorializing, and things flat, precise hand. A catering contractor whose corporate registration traced back to a numbered company with known ties to a Montreal trafficking operation, flagged before their first booking and quietly replaced. A pattern in the building's exterior camera rotation that left a blind spot on the parkade ramp between 10:45 and 11:15 every Tuesday night. A note about the backup encryption on the company's financial servers being 18 months out of date, with a reference number for a maintenance ticket she had apparently submitted to IT that had never been actioned. She hadn't been running quarterly projections. She had been running a quiet, meticulous, one-person intelligence operation from a workstation on the 4th floor, and not a single person in the building had noticed. His phone rang. It was Len. Mr. Huxley. Len's voice was tight in a way Rourke had never heard from him, and Len had done 2 tours overseas and a stint with a private firm in West Africa. I need you in the security room. Right now. The security room in the basement was low-ceilinged and humming, lit by the glow of monitors and the faint blue light of server racks. Len was already there with one of his technical staff, a young woman named Priya who had dark shadows under her eyes. Corrupted camera file from Monday, Len said without preamble. Corridor B3, the maintenance passage outside the 3rd floor server room. Drive had a partial failure. Priya pulled the footage from the cloud redundancy. Rourke sat in front of the central monitor. The notebook was still in his hand. Play it, he said. The footage was time-stamped 10:14 a.m., 1 minute before Naomi should have been in the boardroom. The camera angle covered a T-junction in a maintenance corridor on the 3rd floor, the kind of space used only by facilities staff and nobody else. Naomi was visible entering the frame from the left, carrying the folder, walking at her usual pace, measured, unhurried. A door opened ahead of her. A man stepped out. He was large in the specific way that indicated a particular professional background. Wearing a facilities uniform that fit poorly across the shoulders, his right hand was already moving inside his jacket as he turned toward her. Contract operative, Len said quietly, arms folded. Eastern European national. We found ID on him when we cleared the closet later. Thought he'd been neutralized by one of Falcone's own guys who got cold feet about the meeting. We assumed. He stopped. We never looked at Naomi. On the monitor, the man raised the weapon. He gestured toward the stairwell leading up. He wanted her access card. Naomi didn't raise her hands. She stood perfectly still for 1 second. Then she shifted her weight. What happened next lasted 11 seconds, and Rourke watched it 3 times. She stepped toward the gun. Not away from it. Her left hand came up and struck the slide of the pistol sideways, pushing the mechanism out of alignment so it couldn't cycle. Simultaneously, she swung the folder she was carrying in a tight, controlled arc and caught the man across the throat with the spine of it. He staggered. The gun hit the floor. She didn't stop. A leg sweep, a knee to the sternum. Her hand went into the pocket of her cardigan and produced a small capped syringe. She pressed it into the side of his neck. He went still in 4 seconds. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her cardigan. She bent and retrieved the gun, checked the chamber with a practiced flick, and slid it into her bag. She took the man by the collar and dragged 220 pounds of dead weight across the floor and into the maintenance closet at the end of the corridor. She shut the door. She came back. She picked up the folder, which had landed face down and was entirely intact. She looked at her left sleeve, noticed it had ridden up to expose something on her forearm. She pulled it back down. Then she walked to the stairwell. The timestamp read 10:36 a.m. 11 minutes. She'd had 11 minutes to drag an unconscious man into a closet, compose herself, and climb 11 flights of stairs. 22 minutes late to the boardroom. He had fired her for 22 minutes. There's more, Len said. He looked genuinely ill. The second piece of footage was from a traffic camera on West Georgia, dated 8 months earlier. At 2:17 a.m., a figure in dark clothing was crouched beside Rourke's personal vehicle in the parking structure beneath his Yaletown building. The structure's gate had been propped open, a courtesy bought from a parking attendant who had since, Len said quietly, been quietly relocated. The figure under the car was working on the undercarriage. A second figure appeared from the pedestrian entrance of the structure. She was wearing a dark raincoat and moving quickly but without apparent urgency. The figure under the car rolled out and came up with a blade. Naomi Shepherd did not stop walking. She swung a collapsible baton, the kind sold in any Canadian Tire or outdoor store across the province, and caught him across the forearm. The blade dropped. 2 more steps and she was on him, delivering a controlled strike to his knee that buckled him sideways. She stood over him and said something brief. From the way the man's posture collapsed, not into fight, but into pure absolute fear, whatever she said was sufficient. He scrambled upright on one good leg and fled through the pedestrian gate without looking back. Naomi watched until he was gone. Then she crouched beside Rourke's SUV, examined the brake line with a small flashlight, and spent 6 minutes performing a field repair with materials she'd brought in a canvas shoulder bag. She tested the connection twice. She stood, packed her tools, and walked out of the structure without glancing at the camera. Rourke's brake issue the following morning, logged at the time as a faulty OEM part, repaired under warranty, unremarkable, had not been a faulty part. She had known. She had gone there in the middle of the night, alone, and fixed it, and then come into work the next morning and brought him his notes for a 9 a.m. call. He set the notebook down on the console. His hands were not quite steady. "Find her," he said. Len's expression didn't shift. "We tried, sir. As soon as I pulled the first clip, I sent a team to her address on file. The apartment's been vacated. Landlord confirmed she left Tuesday, paid out the remaining lease in cash, no forwarding address." Rourke stood. She left a notebook with her operational logs in a locked drawer at her own workstation. She didn't simply disappear. "She disappeared well," Len said. "Last entry in the notebook. The date is the day before she was let go." Rourke looked at the final page. November 9, Falcone expanding dry goods distribution into Burnaby warehouse network. Expansion likely within 60 days. Huxley Maritime exterior loading dock, east camera drift 4 degrees left nightly, row 200/400, unpatched. Cross-reference. Hardware purchase, East Hastings. Reinforced deadbolts, weatherproof adhesive, collected in person. Decommissioned fish processing facility, River Road, Richmond. Viable for short-term operational shelter. Generator access perimeter intact. She had left him a map, deliberately. River Road in Richmond ran along the south arm of the Fraser River, a flat industrial stretch of cracked asphalt and chain link that smelled of low tide and diesel and the kind of rain that never quite stopped. The decommissioned facility was 2 stories of concrete and corrugated steel with boards across the windows and a padlock on the main entrance that shone new silver against the rust of everything surrounding it. Rourke went with Len and no one else. He didn't know precisely why he needed to do this particular thing himself. He knew that he did. They parked on the road and walked in through a gap in the fence. Through a side door that was slightly ajar, they could hear the faint hum of a portable generator from somewhere inside. They were halfway down the main corridor when the exterior lights cut out. Then the windows behind them exploded inward. Rourke dropped as the first shots came through. Automatic fire, high and calibrating. Len went sideways behind a concrete pillar and returned 2 shots from his sidearm. Glass and masonry dust filled the air. "How many?" Rourke called. 6 visible at the perimeter, possibly more. Len's voice was tight and controlled. "It's Falcone. He had the building watched. He tracked us from the city." They were boxed in. The exit was behind the shooters. The corridor offered cover but no path forward. Rourke had 5 rounds remaining, and Len was bleeding from a gash above his eyebrow where a shard had caught him. He pressed his back to the wall and ran the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was not good. From somewhere above them, the upper floor, there was a sound like a door opening softly. Then nothing. Then one of Falcone's men outside made a sound that had no tactical precedent, not a shot, not a command, something closer to shock. The automatic fire stuttered. A shadow moved through the blown-in window frames, too low and too fast for any of the remaining shooters to track in the dark. Someone's flashlight swung and found nothing. Then the flashlight went out. 2 of Falcone's men hit the ground without firing another round, and the remaining 4 were backing toward their vehicles with the disordered movement of people who have encountered something they do not have a category for. A single suppressed shot from the upper floor. One of the vehicle's engines died. The remaining cars left without stopping to collect their colleagues. The rain drummed steadily on the corrugated roof. Somewhere in the distance, the highway hummed. Footsteps came down the interior stairs, quiet, deliberate, making exactly as much sound as they chose to make. Naomi crossed the floor toward them. She was wearing dark utility trousers, a black turtleneck, and boots that made no impression on the concrete. Her hair was tied back in a tight knot. There was a cut along her collarbone that had bled through the fabric of her shirt, and her knuckles were scraped red. She looked, Rourke realized with a strange delayed clarity, exactly the same as she always had. The same measured economy in every movement, the same face that gave away only what it had decided to give. She looked at Len first. "Sit down," she told him. "That laceration needs pressure." Len Taggart, who had not taken orders from anyone except Rourke in 6 years, sat down without hesitation. She crouched, assessed the wound with 2 fingers against his forehead, and had a compression bandage applied from her cargo pocket in under 40 seconds. Then she stood and looked at Rourke. "You're loud," she said. "You left me a map," he said. "I left an address in case I needed extraction. I didn't anticipate Falcone having the location under observation." A pause, the length of someone acknowledging a miscalculation. A lapse. "An unforeseen logistical complication," Rourke said. Something crossed her face, the ghost of something that in another context might have been wry. "Apparently," she said. They stayed in the upper room while the rain continued. Len dozed against the wall with his bandaged head tilted back. Naomi sat across from Rourke on a low crate, her hands loose in her lap, the suppressed pistol set down on the floor beside her with its safety engaged. He asked her the questions. She answered them in the same order he asked, without evasion and without embellishment. "Who sent you?" "Nobody." "Then who are you?" "Someone who used to work for an organization whose name she wouldn't confirm, but whose general description was close to enough to CS that Rourke stopped requiring specifics. "What happened?" "An operation in Quebec City, 5 years ago, that went wrong in a way that got her disavowed, her identity burned, and a well-funded criminal organization convinced she was a problem worth eliminating permanently. And then she'd been in a hospital in Montreal with no identification, no handler, no one who could acknowledge knowing her name. And a man named Edmund Huxley had been 3 floors above her recovering from emergency bypass surgery, and they had ended up in the same rehabilitation wing by the particular random machinery that moves people into the same spaces when they need each other. Rourke went very still when she said his father's name. "He was kind," Naomi said. She was looking at her hands, the scraped knuckles, the small evidence of the evening. "He didn't ask me what I'd done or who I'd worked for. He asked if I had somewhere to go. When I said no, he made calls. I had a new identity in 6 weeks and a lease in Vancouver in 8. She paused. "He told me to disappear, to find something quiet, to rest. But you didn't." "I tried. Peace is loud. It didn't suit me." "So you applied for a position in my analytics division." "The junior analyst role gave me full access to the data infrastructure, a direct view of your external-facing operations, and a plausible reason to be present at any meeting involving logistic coordination." She said it plainly, without apology, not because she wasn't sorry, Rourke realized, but because she'd assessed that this particular truth was past the point where apology was the appropriate response. The 4th floor is invisible. No one looks at the data team. No one looked at you. That was the point. He thought about that. 2.5 years of green tea and grey cardigans. 2.5 years of being the least remarkable person in every room. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "After the parking structure, after that night, you could have come to me. I would have paid you whatever you named." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "Because you wouldn't have trusted me," she said at last. "In the world you operate in, capability is a resource. If you knew what I was, I'd have become something to be aimed. And things that get aimed eventually get pointed at the person holding them." She paused. "By staying invisible, I stayed effective. You trusted me because you didn't notice me. The truth of it needed no commentary. And then I fired you," Rourke said. "You terminated my employment," Naomi said with a precision that was technically accurate and quietly devastating at the same time, "which released me from the arrangement. My father's debt was paid. I was going to leave the city. But you left me a trail." She didn't answer that one directly. Outside, the rain shifted and thinned, and through the boards on the windows, the first grey suggestion of morning light was beginning to show. The sun came up over Vancouver in the way it did in November, pale and provisional, the light arriving as an afterthought through cloud cover that hadn't quite decided to lift. On the 44th floor, the inlet was silver and still, the mountains across the water resolving slowly out of the morning grey. Rourke stood at the windows with a coffee he wasn't drinking. Behind him, the door opened. The footsteps were different now, not silent, deliberate and grounded, the steps of someone who had decided to take up the space she occupied. He turned. Naomi walked in wearing a fitted charcoal blazer and dark trousers, her hair loose around her shoulders. The cut at her collarbone was covered. She moved differently in this room than she ever had before. Not larger, exactly, just present, in a way she had spent 2.5 years carefully avoiding. Falcone's operation is fragmenting, she said. With his Vancouver network disrupted, the Port Authority should have adequate breathing room. I'd recommend a 2-week window to realign the loading dock security rotation before anyone moves to fill the gap. I read your file, Rourke said. She didn't react. And? The one you left on my desk this morning. A pause, the faintest shift in her expression, the beginning of something she hadn't yet decided to show. I wasn't certain you'd find it. You were completely certain I'd find it. Standard deductive reasoning, Mr. Huxley. He crossed the room toward her. She didn't step back. My mother is ill, Naomi said quietly, unprompted, and something in her voice shifted, a voluntary admission, the first genuinely personal thing she had offered him in 2.5 years. MS. The medication isn't fully covered. That's the reason I took the position when your father arranged it. The extended benefits plan was. She stopped herself. I'm not telling you that to negotiate anything. I'm telling you because you deserve the whole picture. Rourke looked at her the way he should have been looking at people all his working life, and mostly hadn't bothered to. Then let me offer something different, he said. Not a salary, not a contract for services rendered. He paused. A seat at the table here, knowing everything. Not as someone running interference from the 4th floor where nobody looks, but as someone who sits in the room and is seen. Naomi was quiet for the length of time the question deserved. That's a significant operational risk for both of us, she said. I know. The people who want to disrupt your business will adapt when I'm no longer invisible. I know that too. And I don't do coffee. There's a machine. The ghost of something finally arrived, a real smile, the kind that came from somewhere underneath all the years of careful composure, the kind that changed her face the way the sun changes the inlet when it finally commits. Same water, completely different thing. She held out her hand. Rourke took it. Her grip was exactly as certain and unhesitating as everything else about her. The thing he should have seen from the first afternoon, the thing that had been sitting at a 4th floor workstation in a grey cardigan for 2.5 years, keeping him alive while he looked straight through her. Rourke Huxley had built his life on the conviction that he saw everything and controlled everything. It had taken losing the one person he'd never once truly looked at to understand that the most formidable force in any room is the one that doesn't need you to notice it. He noticed her now. That was enough to begin.